Good afternoon from Napoli, or Naples as you might say in English, but don't confuse it with Florida. I've been in this delightful, vibrant city in southern Italy for almost a month now, as well as the broader Campania region, which includes the Amalfi Coast and a bunch of islands. While I've been here, I've noticed a lot of things that I personally find really interesting. Now, some of these things might be unique to Napoli or to Italy, and some might just be things that I happen to notice here for the first time. Some of these are things I absolutely love about being here in Napoli, and some not so much. Stick around to the end if you want to hear my least favorite thing about being here. So without further ado, here are 15 things that I find interesting about Napoli and the surrounding region. Oh, and also credit to Lexi for pointing a lot of these things out to me when I'm totally oblivious. As I'm walking through the streets, I constantly find myself wanting to look up because the area above my head is always just so colorful. Most apartments have these little balconies, and many of them are adorned with flowers or other types of plants. Also, most people in this part of Italy don't have dryers, so they dry their clothes the old-fashioned way, by hanging their clothes out on the balcony. Now, although this is done for a purely practical purpose, it adds a lot of beauty to the facades of the buildings. To one person, the clothes hanging out on their balcony are just clothes, right? Nothing special. But collectively, this all comes together to kind of become a part of the city. And it's not just clothing that adds to the color overhead. There's also an impressive display of football fandom on a lot of the streets. It's not uncommon to find blue and white streamers hanging across buildings. These are the colors of Napoli's football club. Sometimes there's even faces of the players overhead in the middle of the street. So between football, plants, and laundry, I feel like if I'm ever bored in Napoli, I can just look up and immediately find something beautiful. Now, if simply looking up doesn't make you happy while you're walking down the street, maybe an Aperol spritz will do the trick. I knew you could legally drink on the street in much of Europe, but I've never seen this many places selling drinks specifically for the purpose of taking it to go and drinking it on the street. Hi, can I get Aperol spritz?
250 or 150?
150, small.
Ragazzi, Aperol spritz, ragazzi! Limoncello spritz, Maradona spritz, ragazzi!
Oh, and side note, no one uses the term to go here like they do in America. In English, the term that gets used is takeaway, and in Italian, da asporto. I wouldn't say these takeaway cocktail places are everywhere. I've really only noticed them in the touristy parts of the city, like where I am right now. But in these areas, being able to grab a drink in less than a minute and take it with you just makes walking around a little more fun. And some of them are pretty affordable. This little Aperol Spritz I got was only €1.50, and I could have gotten one 3 times the size for only $2.50. I actually don't really like Aperol that much, but a Limoncello Spritz? And that's my drink of choice. Another place where you can get something to drink is obviously the grocery store. Now, I love going to grocery stores in new places and observing all the little nuances from country to country or even city to city. And here's what I've noticed about the grocery store in our neighborhood. So first of all, there's a lot of pasta. Now, I am in Italy, so this shouldn't come as a surprise, but still, I was blown away by the amount of pasta I saw when I first went to the grocery store. There's an aisle that's almost entirely pasta on both sides of the aisle, and it's not just dried pasta either. There's so much fresh pasta in all shapes and sizes, taking up a pretty good chunk of the refrigerated section. This fresh pasta is actually mostly what we've been using to cook meals in our apartment. And what about cheese? Well, same thing. There's an absolute ton of fresh cheese here. You know what goes great with fresh pasta and cheese? Well, wine, obviously. And the prices of wine here are out of this world, in a good way. Most of the bottles of wine on the shelf are under €7. And I'm not talking about the bottom shelf. That's just how most of them are priced, with a few exceptions. I've seen bottles of wine for as low as €2.50. And if a bottle isn't big enough, you can get a whole jug of wine for anywhere from €4 to €6. And these are 3-liter jugs, so we're talking €1 or €2 per liter. Insane. Now, if you don't want alcohol, there's always Fanta. I've always heard that Fanta tastes better in Europe than it does in the US, and I experienced that quite a bit last month in Bulgaria. Oh, and if you're wondering why, it's because they use actual sugar in Europe rather than the high fructose corn syrup they use in the US. After drinking a ton of Fanta last month elsewhere in Europe, I didn't expect it to be any different in Italy. But I immediately noticed that it's a lot less orange here. Like in Bulgaria, even though it tastes different than it does in America, it's still got that same bright orange color. but here it's kind of like a dull yellow color. My guess is that there's some sort of laws about artificial coloring in Italy that don't extend to the rest of Europe. I've also had to physically change the way I shop a little bit. In every grocery store I've been to elsewhere, when you're buying bulk produce, it gets weighed at checkout. Like, no matter whether you're checking out with a person or doing self-checkout, there's always a scale built into the checkout machine. Well, that's not the case here, at least at the supermarket I've been going to. As you're bagging your produce, you have to remember the little number next to it and then enter that number into a machine where you weigh your produce and get a sticker with a little barcode. Then at checkout, they just scan that barcode without having to weigh anything. It's actually a pretty efficient system that I really like now that I'm used to it, but it definitely made for a confusing moment at first when me and Lexi showed up to the checkout aisle with bags and bags of produce that hadn't been weighed yet, and the employee trying to frantically explain to us in Italian what to do with it. And I actually don't think this is an Italian thing. This is just the first time I've personally seen a system like this. Another thing that confused us at the grocery store was trying to buy trash bags for our apartment. So we thought this would be fairly straightforward, maybe one type of bag for trash and another for recycling. But what we found is that there are so many different colors of bags. So then we had to look up how trash bags work in Italy. So basically how it works is you have one color bag for food, another for paper, another for plastic, another for glass, another for the non-recyclable and non-compostable stuff. And the trash bins on the street where you eventually throw this stuff into have colors to match. So you have one bin for glass, another for plastic, another for food, another for general trash, etc. Also, look at this. I'm not sure how often they actually pick it up. I don't think I've ever been anywhere that takes recycling this seriously. Like most other places, you just have trash and recycling, and the recycled stuff gets sorted through later. But here, they're really into saving trees, which is awesome. Speaking of trees, here's a street I really like. Now, this section of the street is really unique because the trees lining it are super dense. The trees on one side of the street actually touch the trees on the other side of the street, and they form a ceiling of leaves. Even in the daytime, these trees block quite a bit of the sunlight, so this section of the street is substantially darker than anywhere in the surrounding area. The way the light changes almost makes you feel like you've walked indoors, but it's literally just trees. Like, it's kind of surreal. Number 6, penises. I don't know how to transition into that one. I have seen more penises in the Campania region of Italy than I have ever seen anywhere else in the world. Not like actual penises, but here's some spray paint that I found on a wall within minutes of arriving in Napoli. Then there's this one on this statue behind me that I also discovered my first day here. And this isn't just a modern thing either. A little farther south in Pompeii, people were carving penises into building walls and roads over 2,000 years ago. Apparently, this was a way of pointing people to the brothels. I only noticed this one group of 4 penises when I went to Pompeii, but apparently there's a ton more that I just missed. But in modern times, instead of using penises to point to brothels, people just use them as bottles for limoncello and meloncello. It's not hard to find this stuff in a penis bottle. These things are everywhere, at least in the touristy areas, both in Napoli and further south towards the Amalfi Coast. Here's my favorite one. If you can figure out what this expression is supposed to be, leave a comment down below. Oh, and yeah, I definitely bought a limoncello penis when I was down in Sorrento. Let's talk more about limoncello for a bit because I'm kind of overwhelmed by just how much of it I've seen. Before coming here, I didn't really know anything about limoncello other than the fact that it's an Italian liqueur that people drink after meals. I'd had it maybe once or twice in my life before coming here. What I didn't realize is that it's not just a general Italian thing. It's actually pretty specific to this part of Italy, and it's deeply rooted in the culture of the Campania region. Most of the lemons used to make this stuff are coming from Sorrento or other areas near the Amalfi Coast. Also, these lemons are a lot bigger and more wrinkly than what I'm used to seeing. Apparently, lemons from Sorrento have a very oil-rich skin, which makes them perfect for limoncello production. If there's one thing I've seen almost as much as lemons and lemon-flavored beverages, it's dogs. And not stray dogs like in some other countries. I'm talking about pet dogs with owners. This is probably the most dog-friendly place I've ever been to, and there are dogs all over the place. In other places we traveled to before Italy, we used to leave Nala at home if we were going out to eat, unless we were certain they had outdoor seating. But here she's allowed inside basically everywhere. We've taken her inside tons of restaurants and nobody's told us not to. Contrast that with restaurants back home where we were once told we couldn't even take Nala onto a patio because you had to pass through an indoor area to get there, and apparently there was some law against that. Same thing with public transit. We've brought Nala on buses, metro trains, regional trains, and we don't even bother bringing her carrier anymore. We just let her sit on the seat. And when the train employees walk by, they just don't care that there's a dog sitting on the seat. It's definitely a lot easier to travel with a dog here than anywhere else we've been because we don't have to constantly check whether Nala will be allowed somewhere. We can just assume it'll be fine. Oh, and having Nala in restaurants all the time means she has a new favorite food: pizza. This is the main reason why I was excited to spend a month in Napoli. This city is the birthplace of pizza, and the Neapolitan style that they make here has always been my favorite type of pizza. The word Neapolitan literally means from Napoli, or from Naples. That's the kind of pizza that's super thin in the center, but with the super puffy and sort of charred crust. Now, I'm from Chicago, which is also a city known for its pizza, but my favorite pizzeria in Chicago wasn't even Chicago-style deep dish. It was Neapolitan style. And holy shit, there are Neapolitan pizzerias everywhere you look. And that pizza that I said was my favorite back home, that's just like your average pizza here. The quality of the pizza everywhere you go is absolutely insane. It's so perfect that the only thing that would make it better is some jarred. And because of that, I've eaten pizza every day that I've been here. That's not an exaggeration. I'll have moved out of Napoli by the time I edit this video, so I think I'll just throw some end of month stats on the screen. Also, some of the pizza in this city is incredibly affordable. At a lot of places, you can get a basic margherita pizza for only €5.50. That's an entire pizza for under €6. Then you might get into the €7 or €8 range if you want a pizza with more toppings on it. And I kind of figured that pizza would get more expensive as you get into the more touristy areas, but that hasn't really been the case. Now, a lot of restaurants have what's called a coperto, which is a cover charge for eating at the restaurant. It's usually like €2 or €3 per person. But if you get your pizza as takeaway, da asporto, you don't have to pay that. So you can literally just pay €5.50 and have an incredible pizza in your hands. Also, these things cook fast. On multiple occasions, I've gone from ordering my pizza to walking out of the restaurant in under 5 minutes. I'm not kidding. So I ordered 2 pizzas at 12:43. It is now 12:47. 4 minutes. One thing that's different about getting pizza here in Napoli is that it's never cut for you. They just give you the whole pizza and expect you to cut it yourself. This applies to both dine-in and takeaway. Oh, and pizza cutters don't really seem to be a thing here either. Every pizza we've gotten, we've had to cut ourselves with a fork and knife. And I'm used to it now after doing it 20 or so times, but it was definitely a little strange at first. So now you know some things that I love about being in Napoli, but there are also some things that I don't like so much. You know, being anywhere in the world has its own set of trade-offs, and I think it's important to talk about the downsides as well. So first off, I've had more trouble communicating with people in this city than I have pretty much anywhere else in the world, except maybe the more rural parts of Russia. And this isn't meant to be a judgment about any of the people here. I'm choosing to come to this country, and I don't expect anyone to speak my language. I should have to put in more effort to communicate with people, but I'm just stating a simple fact that I've struggled here way more than most other places. Now, this might come as a surprise because Italy is so well known as a country that attracts lots of international tourists. I'm sure a lot of people go on a week-long trip to Italy without having anyone speak to them in Italian. And yeah, that's totally possible if you stay at a hotel, stick to the areas that have tourist attractions, and only eat at restaurants that get a lot of international guests. But that's not what we're doing. We're basing ourselves out of Napoli for a month, and at least during the weekdays, we're mostly just doing everyday things among the locals in our residential neighborhood, which is called Chiaia. And communicating here has been quite a struggle. I'd say maybe half the people I encounter in our area don't really speak any English at all, and among the ones that do, it's very limited. I've ordered from restaurants where nobody speaks a word of English, and in one case I got something very different than what I thought I ordered because the guy was asking me questions and I didn't understand, so I just kind of nodded and smiled. I've tried to buy transit passes from ticket offices where nobody speaks English. Even our Airbnb host doesn't speak English, which has been interesting. Before coming to Italy, I just spent a month in Bulgaria, and originally I was more worried about the English proficiency there. But it turns out I had nothing to worry about there. In Bulgaria, almost everyone I encountered spoke perfect English. But in Napoli, it's been a completely different experience. Now, like I said, it's not like this everywhere in Italy. We went to Milan for a weekend, which is a much more global city and it does a lot of international business. And everyone there spoke to us in English by default, even outside the touristy areas. Same with Rome during the limited time we were there. And when we went further south to popular destinations like Positano and Capri, we barely heard anyone speaking Italian. It was all English all day long. But whenever we come back to our neighborhood in Napoli, our communication is mostly limited to the few words of Italian we know and mostly body language. Another thing that threw me off is that so many things are closed in the afternoons. Restaurants, stores, things like that. This is great for the people who work at these places because they get some time to rest in the afternoon when it's really hot out. But it does require a bit more planning when you're not used to this. For example, a lot of restaurants close for lunch around 2:30 p.m. and they don't reopen for dinner until around 7:30 or 8. It's 4:30 p.m. right now and the streets are super quiet. And we can see here's one of my favorite pizzerias. It doesn't open again until 7:30. And it's kind of wild given that in some parts of America, 8 p.m. would be considered a pretty late dinner. But here, a lot of restaurants don't even open till then. Apparently, this is also a thing in the rest of Italy, but the rest period gets shorter as you go further north and the climate gets milder. But here, we just kind of have to work around the 5-hour period in the afternoon when a lot of restaurants are closed. By the way, this doesn't really seem to affect the touristy areas as much. So if you're just visiting Napoli for a short trip and mostly sticking to the tourist areas, then you don't really have to worry about this as much. Another thing that's kind of annoying is the rocky beaches. I miss sand. Yeah, it gets everywhere, but at least it's comfortable. Here, the beaches I've been to range from having little rocks to having big rocks. The ones with the little rocks aren't too bad. They're a little more similar to sand, but just a little less comfortable. But the ones with the big rocks are really painful. You could easily cut your foot walking across these rocks, and even if you don't, they still really make your feet hurt. The first time I went, I didn't have water shoes, and that was a mistake. I ended up buying water shoes later that evening, and they definitely make this type of beach a lot more comfortable. But seriously, sandy beaches are so much better. Next one, toilet seats. I've seen so many restaurants without any toilet seats. So if you have an upset stomach after eating too much pizza, good luck. Here's one that cost me a lot of time. I have never seen such a clusterfuck of a transit system. Like, oh my God, why is everything so confusing? All right, so you have metro trains and buses going around the city, and then you have regional trains and buses going longer distances, right? That's all pretty standard. Figuring out how to pay for it, though, that's where the issue is. I have never felt dumber than I have just figuring out how to pay for transit in Napoli and Campania. I feel like most other places have transit systems that they expect foreigners are going to want to use, so they have clear signs, clear information online in multiple languages, etc. Right? Like they want more people to use it because that's more money going into the system. But here, what is going on? It's almost like they don't want people from outside the region using their trains and buses. Now, I hate making these accusations without having specific examples to back them up. But when I originally wrote this video, my stories about trying to pay for transit turned into a 7-minute segment. And this video is already getting pretty long, so I'm gonna split that out into its own video. So hit that subscribe button if you wanna see that video once I post it. And it's not just getting around on trains and buses that's annoying. Even walking is harder here than anywhere else I've been. And I'm not talking about elevation changes. That's unavoidable when you have a city built against a huge hill, but that's not really the issue. The issue is mostly the lack of sidewalks. Now, the city isn't totally devoid of sidewalks. They do exist on the major roads, but outside of those major roads, there are so many streets that just don't have sidewalks. Now, I'm not talking about little alleys that no one's gonna walk down. I'm talking about streets that have lots of restaurants and shops and lots of both pedestrian traffic and vehicle traffic. People just kind of walk in the middle of the street and then they have to get out of the way when there's a car coming. Or when there's a scooter coming, it'll usually just kind of weave through the pedestrians. So basically, the vehicles and the pedestrians occupy the same space on a lot of streets.
It's amazing though, it seems that like it's like 100% controlled chaos where it's like, it seems like I know you gotta be running people over and it's like, no, like no one really gets hit and like the motorbike's like flying down. Like,
I don't know how I haven't gotten hit yet.
Where's this guy going?
I'm always like
Through these doors, it's like a big
away
road.
In some places, you have these poles on either side of the street that look like they should be a barrier between the pedestrians and the vehicles. But that side area always has trash bins blocking the way, or parked scooters, or restaurants or shops spilling into that area. So these areas to the side of the poles are effectively useless for walking. The only way to really get around is to walk in the middle of the street and then try and get out of the way as cars go by. Outside the city, it gets even worse. There have been times where the only way to get somewhere is to walk along the road on a side of a cliff with no sidewalk. In some places, the roads are barely wide enough to even let a vehicle through. So there have been times where we've heard a car coming and have had to kind of squeeze our bodies up against a wall in order to let the cars through. And it's even scarier when it's a bus trying to get through. Unfortunately, I didn't take any footage of the super narrow parts because I was more focused on trying not to get hit. Switching gears back to the city for a moment, there are so many places where you have long stretches of road with no stop signs or stoplights, and you just have random crosswalks for pedestrians to use to cross the street. But drivers here are kind of aggressive, and they don't really slow down at a crosswalk unless they're literally about to hit you. Every time I cross a busy street without a stoplight, I feel like I'm playing Frogger with the cars, even though there is a clearly marked crosswalk. Put this all together and you have multiple times per day where there's cars or scooters coming within mere inches of me on the street. Every day I walk outside and think, maybe today is the day I get my foot run over by a car. Now, I don't think I'm in any actual danger, but still, walking around here just requires so much more mental energy and alertness than it does pretty much anywhere else I've been. Even in like parts of Asia I've been to with way more chaotic driving, you could mostly avoid that chaos as a pedestrian. But here, you always have to be on your toes. So that's it. I know I structured this video so the bad things are at the end, but don't let that be what you take away from this video. This is really such an awesome city, and I'm so happy I got to spend a month here. From the bustling streets with vibrant buildings, to the beautiful coastline, to the incredible pizzerias, I'd come back to this city in a heartbeat. I highly recommend anyone who's thought about exploring southern Italy to give Napoli a look. So go ahead and smash that like button if you enjoyed learning about Napoli and Campania, and I will see you in the next one.